All right, well, good morning once again. We're going to go to the book of Luke this morning, chapter 19. Ruth read our text earlier today, and we're going to continue to go through this series we're calling Reaching Out. And one of the things that we wanted to accomplish with this series was just to look at how Jesus himself reached out to people when he walked this earth. So one of the purposes of the incarnation of Jesus was to provide us an example. And he certainly did that in the way that he lived. He certainly did that in the way that he interacted with people. And so as we've gone through this series, one of the things that we want to keep reminding you over and over is this: are you engaged in the one thing Jesus has you here to be engaged with? And that's making disciples. So about 3 weeks ago, we discussed and examined Jesus' command in Matthew 28. Go therefore, he says, all authority is given to me in heaven and in earth. Go therefore, so based on his authority as the risen Son of God, go therefore and make disciples. We baptize, we teach. As we make disciples, we baptize, we share the gospel, we share the hope of Christ, right? So the question that I really want to leave with you today is, are you doing that? When was the last time you shared Jesus with somebody? When was the last time you shared the hope of the gospel with somebody who doesn't know Jesus? If you're kind of like, well, there was that time, carry the two, it's been a while. Right? Then we have to stop and say, okay, what are we doing with our lives? I'm just so busy, Doug. Like I'm working, I've got a family, I've got, kids I've got to take care of, I've got responsibilities. And yeah, I get that, and Jesus gets that too. That's why as we go along our way, what we noticed with Jesus' interaction 2 weeks ago actually, with the Samaritan woman at the well, is there was an intentional pursuit. We're going to see that today in our text in Luke 19. See, if we're not intentional with making disciples, it probably won't happen. Let me say that again. If we're not intentional with our pursuit of people and intentional with making disciples, it just probably isn't going to happen. It's something you have to have on your radar all of the time. Like, this is why I'm here. This is why God has me where he has me. Acts chapter 17 says this in verses 26 and 27. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. Now catch this. Having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So Paul's kind of speaking in the book of Acts here, saying that from one man, Adam, God's created all nations, and God has determined the amount of years that you'll live, and he's also determined where you're going to live. Did you know that? You thought you had a choice in this. Actually, God placed you where you are, in the family that you're in. God placed you there. In the neighborhood that you're in the home that you're in, next to the neighbors that you live next to. God placed you there. God placed you there. The job that you're in right now, God has you there. Why does God have you there? Well, I need a place to stay and a place to work. Not according to Acts. God has you there. He's determined allotted periods and the boundaries of your dwelling place. Why? Verse 27, that they should seek God, and in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and discover him. So what Paul's theology was in the book of Acts was that God has determined your allotted time period. He's determined the boundaries of your dwelling so that you may be around people that should seek God and find God. That's why you're there. That's why you live where you live. That's why you work where you work. That's why you play where you play. That's why you're there. And so what I want to help us to do is to look at our lives through that lens. And if we can begin to look at our lives through the lens of the mission, we're going to be more intentional with our pursuit of people. And guess what? 2 things will happen. One, you're going to experience people receiving Christ, becoming disciples of Jesus, taking their next step, being baptized, being taught, and growing. You're going to experience that. And there's nothing greater in life than that. There's nothing greater in life than experiencing someone who recognizes that they're lost and that they need Christ and they put their faith in Christ alone. And then God just does this amazing work of gifting them faith and raising them from the dead spiritually and igniting them with faith to believe. And then they grow and like that's like if you've not experienced that in someone else's life, there's nothing greater. This second thing that'll happen is you'll get rejected, okay? So I wish I could say, man, it's all going to be like awesome, amazing, people are going to get saved and you're going to experience the power of God and it's going to be awesome. Well, that will happen. But you'll also experience rejection. So Jesus, right? The greatest evangelist, the greatest soul winner, the greatest preacher ever to live, the wisest, the most powerful, right? He suffered quite a bit of rejection, didn't he? Remember the whole crucifixion on the cross thing? It's pretty severe rejection, right? So what'll happen is we get serious about the mission is people will respond with faith, and God will give them that faith through your proclamation of His word. But you'll also get rejected, right? Okay, so there's both things that'll happen, and I think the fear of the rejection and the fear of possible ridicule and possible oh my word, it's the weird religious guy kind of, I don't want to be him, in the job. Like all of these fears keep us from intentionally pursuing people. But you have to look at your life through the lens of the mission. God has you where He has you for a reason. And it's so people can know and find God. Pure and simple. And so, what that means is that you look at everything and everything you have, and everything you're doing through the lens of pointing people to Jesus so that they might discover and receive Christ. So, that means this, okay? That means you are not here primarily for your own dreams and ambitions. Okay? You're not here to achieve your dreams. What you're here to do is to achieve the ambitions and dreams God has for you. Which, by the way, are a lot better than ours. A lot better. So if your future plans in no way involve how you're going to reach people where they are, then maybe we need to rethink our plans, right? Some of you are planners and you're like, okay, we're going to do this and then I'm going to set this goal here financially, and then we're going to be here in 5 years, and then in 10 years I'm going to be here. And some of you plan things out, right? And most of our plans in life, can we just be honest, are kind of centered around financial goals and obligations. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Having a good financial plan is a good thing. However, when we examine our plans for the future, we can't just assume that disciple making is a part of those. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, of course, it's a given that I'm going to make disciples. Really? So I'll say what I said before. We're not going to probably make many disciples if we're not intentional with it. And one of the patterns that Jesus left us was this intentional pursuit of people. And we see that here in the book of Luke chapter 19. So let's go there once again. It says this: Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a wee little man. A wee little man was he. He was also a chief tax collector and was rich. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit of background here, okay? Jesus was coming into Jerusalem. Usually people traveled in larger groups in the first century, mostly because there was safety in numbers. And so if they traveled in groups, there was generally safety. Oftentimes when a group would enter the city, the members of the city would come out and greet the group. Maybe there were family members coming to visit you. Maybe it was a famous rabbi named Jesus who was creating a stir throughout Galilee, and so they were coming out to see. And so Jesus is coming with his disciples. There are probably others with him. There's probably a larger group of people entering Jericho. And it says there's this man named Zacchaeus. Now, we know that tax collectors were hated in the first century by the Jewish people. Now, there's a couple of reasons why they were hated. Number one is they cheated people out of their money, right? How many of us love to pay more in taxes than we actually have to pay? Like, oh yeah, let me just give the government more. I just love that. I'm sure they'll be very good with my money, right? I just trust that, right? None of us, and it was no different in the first century, okay? Especially with the Roman government. And so what these tax collectors would do is they would defraud people, and then they would take money, and that's partially how they became so wealthy and rich. We know that Zacchaeus was rich because the text says he was very rich. There was another layer of disdain for the tax collectors amongst the Jewish people in particular, because most of the tax collectors had to purchase the right to be a tax collector for Rome. So imagine living in Jerusalem, and the Roman Empire is expanding, and the Roman Empire invades the area of Jerusalem and Judea and Galilee, and so Israel is under Roman rule. Now, in the first century, Rome allowed Israel to have Herod as king, but Herod had limited power. It was ultimately Rome that controlled things, and there were Roman garrisons all throughout the region and Roman soldiers everywhere. And so while they had some amount of freedom, it was really Rome who controlled everything, and Rome who collected the taxes, and Rome taxed the people. Now, imagine someone that you knew who was a Jewish person purchasing the right to collect taxes for Rome. Now, Rome was not a super popular empire for the Jewish people. They didn't allow the Israelites to have the freedom that Israel necessarily wanted. They had some freedom, and Rome tried to keep this peace throughout the empire, but the way they kept peace was through a lot of crucifixions, and so people being crucified outside the city was a common theme. All right, people suffering in agony on crosses outside the cities. That was just a message to everyone, don't defy Rome. Don't do it. And so now you have someone that is looked upon as a traitor because now they have turned their back on their Jewish friends and family, and now they're collecting taxes for the very, empire that is crucifying people, all right, that is governing and controlling, a lot of our lives. And so there was this level of hatred that the average Jewish person had for the tax collectors, yes, because they cheated people out of money, but also because they had really become traitors to their own people and had started to collect taxes for the Roman Empire. And so there were two levels of just disdain that people had for these tax collectors. But they were generally very rich. Most of them started out rich and were able to purchase the right to be a tax collector, and then they made even more riches on top of that through the defrauding of the people that they were collecting taxes from. So the text goes on to say this. Verse 3, Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, he was rich, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So you know, if you've grown up in church, you know the story. There is a crowd of people coming to meet kind of the entourage that Jesus is a part of, and there is a great stir in the city. People are talking. There are crowds gathered. They want to hear and see this rabbi named Jesus from Nazareth. They had heard that he had these incredible teachings. They had heard that he had incredible power to do miracles. And so people were coming to witness, the ministry of Jesus. And so Zacchaeus, just being one of the crowd, says, I want to see who this guy is. I want to hear him. I want to see if he can do some miracles. And so he comes and he's trying to see Jesus. He's trying to, get a glimpse. He's trying to hear some of his words. And yet he's having a difficult time. And some of you can identify with this because you are vertically challenged, right? You're not short. You're just challenged vertically. All right, that's the politically correct way of saying it, okay? And so Zacchaeus, we don't know if he had some form of dwarfism or if he was just a short guy. We don't know, but it says he was small of stature. And he was having a tough time trying to get a glimpse of Jesus. And so, I mean, you can imagine this little guy trying to, look in between people's, arms and legs and trying to catch a glimpse and trying to jump up and down, and he's just not having any luck. He's probably getting frustrated. And so he has this idea. Verse 4, he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So he gets to this tree, he climbs up into this tree, and he wants to get a glimpse of Jesus. Now, this is a very wealthy man, but he's also a very hated man. Okay? So understand the context that we're in here. Extremely wealthy, a lot of money, but no friends. I mean, nobody liked this guy. Everybody avoided him. The entire kind of community knew who he was, looked upon him as a traitor, looked upon him as a thief. Nobody liked him. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. Everybody kept their distance from Zacchaeus. Nobody loved him. Nobody reached out to him. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. So it wasn't like, hey, Zacchaeus, let me help you here. So it's like this really wealthy guy is now climbing a tree to see Jesus. And that always kind of stuck with me. Like, usually, kind of the wealthy, dignified guys are like, I don't need to climb a tree. But there was something about Zacchaeus that made him climb a tree to see Jesus. Kind of an undignified thing to do as a grown man. Like, I'm going to climb up this tree so I can see this rabbi. But he did. So there was something going on in Zacchaeus that was drawing him to Jesus. Well, the story goes on. And when Jesus came to the place, the sycamore tree, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So, crowds of people. You've got religious people, you've got blue-collar people, you've got the white-collar people, you've got everybody, kids running around, and then you've got the short guy in the tree. And it's really amazing what Jesus does. We've always said that Jesus was counterculture. He certainly was with the Samaritan woman at the well, right? When he said to her, give me a drink, and she says, how is it that you, a Jewish man, speak to me, a Samaritan woman? Completely counterculture. It's like Jesus looked at the culture and says, yeah, I'm not going to go along with that. I'm going to do something different. So there's this radical way in which Jesus kind of lived his life. He didn't just go along with culture to find acceptance. He kind of went against the grain of culture. And so he stops at the tree, and he looks up to Zacchaeus, and he says his name. He knows him by name. He says, Zacchaeus, hurry down, because I must stay at your house today. So the first thing that we're going to see from our text is that Jesus pursues sinners, and so should we. There was an intentional pursuit here. We saw it 2 weeks ago with the woman at the well. We see it today in the book of Luke, that Jesus intentionally pursued people who were lost in their sin. He didn't stay away from them. He didn't go around them. He didn't ignore them. He pursued them. Like he sought them out. Like there was an intentional seeking that was indicative of the life of Jesus. He just had this deep heart for people who didn't know him. He had this passion to seek them. Then he says, Zacchaeus, I'm not just going to have this kind of conversation with you here. In fact, let's go to your house. Let's hang out there. Anyone ever invited themselves over to your house before? Right? You're like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, sure, yeah, come on over. Or they show up right at dinner time, like, oh, we're having dinner. Oh, great. Yeah, oh, you want some? Right? Well, in this case, it would have been a tremendously, like really big honor for this rabbi, this teacher, this religious kind of phenom in the area. Like for him to come over to Zacchaeus' house, that would have been like a big deal. And that would have been quite an honor for that to happen. All right, so walk into the city, the short, hated tax collector in the tree, Zacchaeus, I'm going to come to your house. The one thing we see about Jesus was this desire to just cultivate these relationships with people who didn't know him. And Jesus says, I want to get to know you. I want to talk to you. I want to cultivate a relationship with you. Now again, Zacchaeus did not have his life together. Right? He collected taxes for the Roman Empire. He cheated people. He robbed from people. He grew very wealthy because of this. All right, so understand the point at which Jesus meets Zacchaeus. And yeah, Jesus says, let's have a relationship. Let's go to your house. Let's sit down and talk. And so Jesus was actually honoring Zacchaeus by saying, I'm going to come and have a meal with you in your house. And so verse 5, Jesus came to the place. He says, Zacchaeus, hurry up, come down, for I must stay with you. Verse 6, so he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. Received him joyfully. Like, yes, come over to my house. What an honor this would have been for Zacchaeus. And yet, when we look at our own lives, isn't this what Christ did with us? Like, listen, the only reason you're here today is because Jesus found you. Now, we talk in terms of people say, I found God and I found God. And I know that's what it seems like from your perspective, but biblically, like theologically, you didn't find him, he found you. He, in his great love and his mercy and his sovereignty, he pursued you. In the same way that he did Zacchaeus here. And if you're sitting here today, you know God. And you're sitting here today and your life looks vastly different than other people's lives that don't know God. It is because Jesus found you, and in his grace, he saved you. And we can sit here dressed up in our nice church clothes, and we can look at ourselves and say, look how good we are. And that's the temptation, isn't it? But what we have to be reminded of is the only reason we're here today is because of the sovereign grace of God, in that he pursued us with an irresistible grace. And we may have kind of ran from him or resisted, but ultimately, when God pursues lost people with his love and his grace, it's because of his sovereignty, and it's because of what he does in them. So Jesus found you, and the reason you're here today is because the same thing that happened to Zacchaeus is the same thing that happens to us. Jesus pursues us, and he finds us. That's why we call it being lost, right? Like, why is it lost? Because those who are lost are found. Right? Jesus shares these stories. There is the lost sheep that the shepherd, the 99 are in, but there's one lost sheep, so the shepherd goes out, and what does he do? The sheep's lost. The sheep has no, guess who the sheep is? That's you. That's you. That's me. The sheep didn't find the shepherd. Shepherd found the sheep. Right? The woman loses the coin. Jesus says, what does the woman do? She finds the coin. She goes out, she searches for the coin. We're not here today because we're anything. We're here today because he is everything. And what happens when Jesus finds us is this radical thing happens. This is what should happen. Is found people do what? Find people. And this is always the result. Then when we're found by Christ, what do? We go out and we find people. Right? We don't take the light and hoard it and say, oh, look at the light. I've got the light. Yeah, look at me. No, what do we do with the light? Jesus says a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Right? It shines. Where does the light shine? In the dark places of society, in the darkness of the world. That's where the light shines. In the darkness. We can gather here as believers. We can celebrate Christ and worship. But when we leave here, what do? We go into the darkness. We shine the light. And found people find people. This is what happens. This isn't part of your life, and this isn't an aspect of your life, then you have to stop and ask yourself, what am I doing with my life? And the second thing we're going to see is that Jesus always meets people where they are. So should we. So he says, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to your house. I'm just going to meet you where you are. He didn't say you have to clean yourself up for me to come to your house. He didn't say you've got to change all of these evil ways. He just says, Zacchaeus, come down and let me have dinner with you. Let me have dinner with you. Well, verse 7 is an awesome verse because it says, and when they had sought, now the they is what? All of the stuffy religious people. All of the people that had rejected Zacchaeus, all of the people that had pushed him aside, all of the people that had hated him, all of the people that wanted nothing to do with Zacchaeus for years and years, all of the people that kind of just pushed him off in hatred, it's those people. The super religious people who thought they were better than Zacchaeus, who thought they were better than all the sinners in the city, who thought they were really something. So all of these kind of legalistic, uptight, kind of pharisaical religious people. That's who this they is in this verse. So when these people, they had saw it, what they do? They grumbled. That's what religious people do a lot. Religious people grumble. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. Can you believe it? I'd just love to hear, like, I'm sure Jesus was like, bring it. Right? Jesus is just pursuing this guy, and then there's always, the peanut gallery over here, right? Like, oh, what kind of rabbi is this, right? Did you hear he's going to Zacchaeus' house? He's actually going into the house of someone who's a sinner? Oh my goodness. I mean, they were annoyed, frustrated, grumbling, complaining, gossiping because Jesus went into the home and actually showed honor to this man who was, we're not denying, he was a sinner, right? He was a bad guy. But Jesus met him where he was. Jesus just met him where he was. This is what I love about Jesus. You don't have to clean yourself up for Jesus to love you. He'll love you as you are. But on the other side of that, people don't have to clean themselves up for us to love them. Well, Doug, I mean, this person, these people are lost. And guess what? Guess what lost people act like? Lost people. Guess what you acted like before you met Christ and Christ transformed and changed your life? Jesus never sets prerequisites on people in order to love them, and never sets those prerequisites for us to love them. He says, meet them where they are. But their lifestyle, Doug, and they live this way, and they're a sinner. Yes! Yes! That's the point, right? Like, this is who God is calling us to love. This is who God's calling us to pursue. This is who God's calling us to reach out to. People don't have to clean themselves up. You don't have to get to a certain point. Then I'll love you. It's all to love you where you are. Jesus certainly did with you. He certainly loves Zacchaeus where Zacchaeus is. So here's the challenge. Like, build relationships with people who are far from God. Right? People that you're like, oh my word, that person is as far from God as you can be. Like we could all probably think of someone in our mind like that person is far from God. And they've got some serious problems, Doug. Like you don't even know. Like they've got addiction issues, they've got emotional issues. They've got issues. Yeah. So do you, and so did you. And such were you, right? If not for the grace of God invading your life, if not for the pursuit of Christ in your life, where would you be? So build relationships, church. Like go to their house. Invite them into your home. Do what Jesus did. Now I know there's some tension with this right here. Right? And the tension is, well, what if my relationships with, like maybe you have a past, right? And maybe for you, building relationships with people from your past actually tears you down, right? It actually kind of sucks you back into that lifestyle. Okay, then we have a problem, right? So I'm not saying this is completely cut and dry. I understand there's some tension here with building relationships with people. And yet what happens is this. Some people are like, well, I'm going to continue to have all of these relationships with people from my past, and we'll go out and we'll party and we'll drink and we'll do all of the things we used to do, right? But I'm going to share Jesus with them. Okay. Problem with that is you're probably deceiving yourself in that you're probably not really intending to pursue them with Christ. The problem is like you kind of want your old life, but you also kind of want Jesus too. You ever been there? So understand there is tension here that says, okay, I have to be wise in my relationships, right? And I have to be wise in understanding my motive is share Christ, or my motive is still kind of hang on to some of my old lifestyle choices that are not pleasing to God. And so you have to wrestle with that tension. But what we want to guard against is, let's just build up walls around us, right? Let's just build up all these walls around us, not let anyone who's lost in. Let's just kind of keep, nice and clean and holy right here without any messiness. Why? Because relationships with people who are far from God, like sometimes it's messy, right? And so rather than engage in the messiness of those relationships, we kind of just sanitize ourselves from all of that. Like that's what we want to guard against. So we want to be a light, but we want to build relationships and be willing to build relationships with these people. And Jesus did. And the religious people, they weren't having it. They grumbled, they complained, they said, this is wrong. He shouldn't be doing this. He should be in our house. You know what, Jesus, I can't believe he's going to Zacchaeus' house and having a dinner with that. He should be in our house talking of holy things. Right? Jesus says, no, we're going to go to Zacchaeus' house. We're going to watch the power of God. So the third thing we actually see is that Jesus always meets people where they are and just helps them take their next step. Verse 8 says, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone anything, I restore it fourfold. You know what grace does? Grace transforms people. Grace seeks the lost and transforms people. And what you witness with Zacchaeus is you witness grace transforming him. Why out of the blue would a guy all of a sudden be like, you know what? I've been defrauding people. I haven't been giving to the poor. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell half of my goods. He said he was very rich. So you're talking probably what would be the equivalent of millions of dollars in our day. I'm going to give half of it to the poor. And then you know what I'm going to do? If I've defrauded anyone, it's like if you have, okay? I'm going to restore and pay back fourfold. You know, he's denouncing his wealth right here. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm done pursuing wealth and materialism. I'm just done with that. Why? Because he learned what it meant to embrace Christ. right? He learned what it meant for Jesus to be the supreme object of his affection. And grace does transform people. See, grace doesn't leave you where you are. Jesus will meet you where you are. But in his grace, he will transform you. And grace doesn't just leave you where you are. It changes you and it transforms you. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham." So spiritually, son of Abraham. The religious people couldn't handle that. But also, what happened in Zacchaeus' life was what? What we call salvation. Not because he gave his wealth away. That's not what brought salvation. That was the result of the salvation in his life. Understand this. It was his faith in Christ that produced salvation. Christ saves through faith. And then Jesus gives these statements here. For the Son of Man, speaking of himself, came to do what? To seek an intentional pursuit and to save who? The lost. That's you. That was me. And that's those whom he will seek and save yet in the future. This is why Jesus came. This is why we are here. So I ask you again, church, if this is not a part of our lives, then what are we doing with our lives? Like, we will stand before God and we will give an account to him for how we have used the resources and the life that he gave us so that we could seek and to save the lost. Like, we will give account. So are we following the pattern of Jesus where he says, I'm here and you're here to seek and to save the lost? This is our purpose on earth. I say this again, we are not here to accumulate like nice, pretty things, toys and trinkets, contrary to what this time of the year kind of pushes and preaches through advertising. Like, you need this, right? Like, you need this car with the bow on it. That'll satisfy you, right? You need this version of this electronic device because the last version isn't good anymore. You need this one. You're here to reach people where they are. Cultivate, intentionally pursue, build relationships, and then help them take their next step. And listen, if you're here this morning and you're kind of like, you know, Doug, I'm kind of more like the Zacchaeus in this story. Like, we're all going to identify with different kind of characters in this story. Some of you identify with, you know, the religious people where you're like, I don't talk to lost people and have anything to do with them. Some of you maybe identify with that. Some of you maybe hopefully identify with Jesus. Like, yeah, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to pursue lost people. And I really identify with Jesus. And man, that's who I want to be, right? Some of you may sit here and be like, I identify with Zacchaeus. Be like, just like, I'm in that category of lost. And maybe God's doing something in my life. And maybe God's working, but I'm not sure what's going on, or I'm not sure where I'm at. And you know what? That's okay, because you know what? As Jesus meets you where you are, we will meet you where you are too. And all we want to do is help you take that next step. And that next step for you is faith in Jesus. That next step for you is just placing faith in Christ and Christ alone, based on his death, his burial, and his resurrection. In a moment, I'm going to have the worship team come, and if you were here at our praise service on Tuesday night, which was a really, really great service. There was about 70 of us here that just kind of gave thanks and praise to God and shared what God was doing in our lives over the past year. And there was a song that I'd been listening to over this past year on the radio that just kind of had been speaking to me, called Drops in the Ocean. And I've asked the worship team to come and play that and us sing along with it, because I think this song, as well as any song I've heard lately, identifies the heart of Christ for lost people. So as the worship team sings and as you sing along, I want you to think about these words and how Jesus pursued Zacchaeus with this love. And the words of this song goes, I am for you. I'm not against you. Like for Jesus to say, in my grace, I'm for you. I'm not against you. If you want to know how far love can go, just how deep, just how wide, if you want to see what you mean to me, look at my hands. Look at my side. If you count the times I'd say you are forgiven, they are more than the drops in the ocean. This is Jesus' attitude toward you and me and anyone he's calling to be in relationship to him. Father, we have looked at Jesus this morning. And in looking at Jesus, God, we have been challenged. God, we've been convicted. Lord, I pray that you would allow us to have the heart that Jesus had for those who are lost, for the people, for the Zacchaeuses of this world, those who have been pushed aside, those who have been rejected. God, that we as a church, that we as individuals would love them, would pursue them as Jesus does, that you would use us to call them to faith and call them to repentance. God, it's not up to us to judge them or to condemn them. God, they will stand before you one day, as will all of us. But now you're calling us to pursue in love and grace, to shine the light into the darkness. And so, God, I just pray that we would capture the heart of Jesus, the heart that Jesus had for Zacchaeus, the heart that Jesus had for the Samaritan woman at the well. Lord, that we would have this same heart, this same passion and desire to see lost people meet Jesus and have their lives transformed by grace. So, Lord, help us to know and understand that you are for us, that you're not against us. That your love for us is seen in your wounded hands and your wounded side. That your forgiveness is deeper than the ocean. And help us to communicate that message to a world who desperately needs it. In Jesus' name.